It was a bright and breezy afternoon when Margaret Weston decided to visit her favorite cafe, tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. She had always enjoyed this small, cozy place. Unlike the grand and elegant restaurants she often dined in, this cafe had a warm, welcoming atmosphere. It was the perfect escape from her busy life as a successful businesswoman. Margaret liked to come here whenever she needed a break from her world of board meetings and conference calls. It was her way of reconnecting with a simpler life. Margaret was used to being surrounded by luxury, with a life full of wealth and opportunity. But there was always something missing. Despite her success, she often felt lonely. She had achieved everything many people dream of, but the one thing she had never quite found was real, genuine companionship. The feeling of having someone by her side who understood her, not just for her money or status, but for who she really was something she yearned for. So on this particular day, she took a moment to sit by the window, enjoying her peaceful lunch lost in her thoughts. Jason Carter, on the other hand, walked into the cafe with a different kind of energy. He wasn't there to enjoy a quiet moment. For Jason, each day was a race. A single father to a young boy, he had a lot on his plate. His clothes were old and worn, and the tiredness in his eyes showed the weight of his struggles. But there was a quiet dignity in the way he carried himself. Jason wasn't a man who complained even though life hadn't been easy on him. He had lost his wife to illness 2 years ago, and since then he had been doing his best to raise his son on his own. The money he earned from his 2 jobs barely covered their bills. He had dreams, big ones, but they always seemed just out of reach. Still, he held on to hope. He believed that hard work and determination would eventually lead to a better life for his son, no matter how small the steps seemed. Today, as usual, he was trying to make the most of his lunch break. He ordered a modest sandwich using the last of his money. He knew it wouldn't be enough, but at least it would keep him going through the rest of the day. Jason found a corner of the cafe where he could sit quietly and eat his lunch, trying not to attract too much attention. It wasn't that he didn't like people. It was just that he didn't want anyone to feel sorry for him. He hated being pitied. He didn't want anyone to know just how hard things were, how sometimes he didn't even know how he was going to make it through the week. As Margaret sipped her coffee, she noticed the young man sitting across the room. There was something about him that caught her attention. Maybe it was the way his eyes seemed tired, but determined. He wasn't looking for sympathy. He just seemed like a man who was trying his best even if the world wasn't making it easy for him. Margaret watched him for a moment, feeling a pang of something she couldn't quite place. It wasn't just the sadness in his eyes. It was also a sense of strength, of perseverance. Then, something unexpected happened. Jason, who had been eating quietly by himself, stood up and walked toward her table. Margaret looked up, slightly surprised. He was approaching her, but he didn't seem to have any sort of arrogance about him. His posture was humble, and his movements were cautious, as if he wasn't sure whether he was even allowed to be in the same space as someone like her. When he reached her table, he stood for a moment, unsure of how to start. His voice, though, was gentle and respectful. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said quietly. "I hate to ask, but would you mind if I had your leftovers? I don't mean to be rude, but I don't have enough for a full meal today." Margaret was taken aback. She had heard stories about people in need, but she had never had someone ask her for food directly, especially not in such a polite, almost apologetic manner. She blinked a few times, unsure how to respond. Her first thought was that he must be desperate. But as she looked at him more closely, she could see that he wasn't asking for handouts in a way that made her feel uncomfortable. There was no sense of entitlement in his eyes, just a quiet, humble request. For a moment, Margaret's mind raced. She had so much food left on her plate. It seemed like such a small thing to offer. But this wasn't just about the food. It was about the moment, the connection that seemed to be building between them, without either of them really knowing it. She gestured to the seat across from her. "Please sit down," she said, offering him the opportunity to share her table. Jason hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should accept. He didn't want to impose on her, especially not someone who had the life he could only dream of. But he was hungry, and he had to admit he felt a little embarrassed by how he had asked. "So, He nodded, slowly taking a seat. "Thank you, ma'am. I really appreciate it," Jason said, sitting down carefully. Margaret smiled, though her smile was tinged with curiosity. "What's your name?" she asked, wanting to know more about the man who had just asked her for the most unexpected thing. "Jason. Jason Carter," he replied. "I'm just a single dad, trying to make it through each day." Margaret couldn't help but notice the way his words, though simple, spoke volumes. Jason wasn't looking for sympathy. He wasn't asking for a handout in the way many people might. He just wanted to eat. But Margaret knew there was more to this man than just the surface. There was a depth to him that intrigued her. She offered him some of the food on her plate, and they began talking. What started as a simple exchange of food turned into a conversation about their lives. Jason spoke about his son, about how hard it had been since his wife passed away, and how he was doing everything he could to make sure his son had a good future. Margaret shared her own story, about the challenges she faced as a successful businesswoman, and how, despite all her wealth, she often felt lonely and disconnected from the world. The conversation flowed naturally. Neither of them had expected it to go beyond a simple exchange of food. But something about the encounter made both of them open up. For Margaret, it felt like a breath of fresh air, a moment of real human connection that she hadn't experienced in a long time. For Jason, it was a chance to talk to someone who didn't judge him based on his appearance or financial situation. In that moment, they were just two people, sharing a meal and a conversation without the weight of their respective worlds pressing down on them. And so, what had started as a simple request for leftovers turned into something much more. Margaret found herself intrigued by Jason's story. By the way he spoke with such passion about his son and his dreams, she saw in him a strength, a resilience that reminded her of the kind of person she had once been before her own life had been consumed by success and ambition. Jason, too, found something in Margaret. It wasn't just the kindness she had shown him. It was the way she listened, the way she seemed to understand him without judgment. In a world that often felt harsh and unforgiving, this brief moment of connection felt like a lifeline. They finished their meal together, and as they parted ways, neither of them knew that this chance encounter would change their lives in ways they couldn't yet imagine. In the days following their first meeting, Margaret and Jason found themselves drawn back to the cafe. It had started as a random encounter, one that neither of them had expected to become anything more. But somehow, without either of them planning, the two began to find comfort in their shared moments. Margaret didn't usually make a habit of returning to the same cafe too often. She was used to a fast-paced lifestyle, jumping from meeting to meeting, her days filled with appointments and events. But for some reason, this small, unassuming cafe became a spot where she could sit quietly, away from the pressures of her world, and just think. And each time she came back, there was Jason, sitting by the window, as if the cafe had become his sanctuary too. It was always at different times, but there he was, always there, just as tired-looking and humble as the last time. Jason, on the other hand, couldn't explain why he kept coming back to this particular cafe. He usually took his lunch in a hurry, eating something quick in between his shifts at the warehouse or running errands. But there was something about this place that made him feel a little more at ease. Maybe it was the quiet, or maybe it was the fact that he could just be himself without the worry of someone asking why he looked so worn out, or why he didn't have the newest clothes. Whatever the reason, he found himself back there again, time after time. The weight of his responsibilities always a little less heavy as he sat with his simple meal and watched the world go by. The next time Margaret saw Jason, he was sitting at a corner table again, just as before. She couldn't help but feel a sense of familiarity when she spotted him. There was something oddly comforting about seeing him there, almost like a reminder that life had simple moments too. Moments where you could just be, without the pressure of constantly striving for more. Margaret's curiosity about Jason had grown since their first meeting, and on this particular afternoon, she decided to take a step forward. She walked over to his table, her heels clicking softly against the floor. Jason looked up, startled at first, but then his face softened into a warm smile. "Oh, it's you, ma'am," he said, standing up to greet her. Margaret smiled back and gestured for him to sit down. "Mind if I join you today?" she asked, already pulling out a chair before he had a chance to answer. Jason hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. "Of course. I'd be honored." As Margaret sat down, the cafe's quiet atmosphere seemed to close in around them, allowing them to talk freely without distractions. Jason had been through a lot in his life, and Margaret realized she had never really had the chance to hear his full story. She felt a strange sense of openness from him, as though he wasn't hiding anything, not even the difficulties he faced, every day. "So, how's your son doing?" Margaret asked after a moment of silence. Jason's face brightened when she mentioned his son, and Margaret could see the pride in his eyes. "He's doing well, thank you for asking. His name's Ben. He's a good kid, really. Gets good grades and always tries to make me proud." Margaret smiled softly. "It must be tough doing everything on your own." Jason's expression grew a little more serious. "It's not easy, but I try to keep going. Some days I feel like I'm barely holding on. You know, it's like everything's stacked against me. But I have to make sure Ben's future is better than mine. He deserves it." Margaret listened carefully, her heart swelling with empathy. She couldn't help but admire how Jason spoke about his son. His love for the boy was obvious in every word, and there was a quiet strength in the way he carried the weight of fatherhood on his shoulders. "There's a lot of sacrifice, isn't there?" Margaret said softly, almost to herself. Jason nodded, and for a moment, they both sat in quiet understanding, the weight of their separate struggles hanging in the air between them. Margaret found herself reflecting on her own life. She had everything anyone could wish for: money, success, opportunities, but she often felt a sense of emptiness. There were days when she longed for something more than the endless meetings and the loneliness that sometimes came with her success. Jason's simple, grounded perspective on life made her question the very things she had worked so hard to build. "Do you ever think about what you want for yourself, Jason?" Margaret asked, breaking the silence. "Not just for Ben, but for you. What's your dream?" Jason thought about the question for a moment, his eyes looking down at the table as he gathered his thoughts. "I've always wanted to start my own business," he said quietly. "Something small but steady. Maybe a little family restaurant or a food truck. It's just a dream for now, though. I don't have the money or the connections to make it happen, but I figure one day I'll get there." Margaret was taken aback by his honesty. Here he was, a man struggling to keep his family afloat, and yet he still dared to dream. She admired that. She admired the fact that Jason wasn't willing to let his circumstances define him. He may not have had much, but he had a dream that kept him going. "You know, I think you're right to keep dreaming," Margaret said, her voice sincere. "Sometimes it's easy to forget that. But dreams are important, even when everything else feels impossible." Jason looked up at her, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You really think so?" "I do," she said firmly. "Everyone needs a reason to keep going. A dream, no matter how big or small, can give you the strength to push through even the hardest days." Jason's smile widened, and for the first time since she met him, Margaret saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Well, maybe one day I'll be able to make that dream a reality. Thanks for believing in me." Margaret felt a warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't something she often felt, but in this moment, sitting across from Jason, she felt connected to him in a way she hadn't anticipated. There was something about his honesty, his resilience, that made her want to help him, even if she wasn't sure how. "Well," Margaret said after a pause, "maybe I can help." Jason blinked, confused. "Help? How?" Margaret leaned forward slightly, her tone serious but kind. "I don't know if you've thought about this before, but I have some experience with starting businesses. I could help you get started. Maybe we can find a way to make your dream come true, together." Jason stared at her for a moment, trying to process what she was saying. "You'd help me?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. But I'm just a guy who barely gets by. Why would you want to help someone like me? Margaret smiled softly, her eyes filled with understanding. Because sometimes, people need a little help to get where they're going. And I think you deserve a chance to follow your dream. The offer hung in the air between them, and Jason sat back in his chair, stunned by the unexpected kindness. He had never imagined that someone like Margaret, with her wealth and success, would even consider helping him. But as he looked into her eyes, he realized that she wasn't just offering him help because of pity. She saw something in him that he hadn't fully recognized in himself. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something new, something he had always hoped for but never believed could happen. For Margaret, it was a step toward something she hadn't anticipated either. Helping Jason wasn't just about charity. It was about offering him a chance to fulfill his dreams, but also finding a deeper connection to someone who was as real and grounded as he was. She had no idea where this would lead, but she felt like something meaningful had begun to take root between them. And with that, their connection deepened, and they both found themselves moving into uncharted waters. Neither could have imagined the unexpected friendship, and perhaps even more, that lay ahead. In the weeks that followed their conversation, Margaret and Jason began to meet more often, their encounters at the cafe turning into a regular occurrence. At first, they spoke in brief bursts about life, dreams, struggles, and hopes. But slowly, their conversations deepened. Each time they met, they found themselves opening up more to one another. It wasn't just about the food anymore, or even about business. It was about something far more significant, a quiet understanding that seemed to grow between them with each passing meeting. Jason continued to work long hours, often juggling 2 jobs to make ends meet. His days were filled with errands and endless tasks to ensure that his son Ben had everything he needed. But despite the exhaustion he felt at the end of each day, he always made time for their meetings. Margaret, too, had a demanding schedule, yet she started to find herself looking forward to these conversations. The cafe became a sort of refuge for her, a place where she could shed the weight of her business life and connect with someone who was far removed from her world of luxury and power. Margaret had never expected to form a bond with someone like Jason. He wasn't part of her world, and at first she had assumed their conversations would remain light, even distant. But there was something about him that made her feel grounded. Jason's honesty, his sincerity, and his unwavering love for his son made her realize how much she had been missing in her own life. She had been so focused on her career and success, chasing after the next big deal, that she had neglected the simple joys of genuine human connection. One afternoon, as they sat together in their usual corner of the cafe, Margaret found herself sharing something she rarely discussed with anyone: how she felt about her success. "I have everything anyone could want," Margaret said, her voice soft, but filled with a quiet longing. "But sometimes, I feel like I don't really have anything at all." Jason looked up from his coffee, his expression one of curiosity. "What do you mean?" Margaret took a deep breath before continuing, unsure why she was opening up like this. "I've worked so hard to build my career, to make sure I have everything I need, but even with all the money, the success, the opportunities, there's still this emptiness. I feel like something's missing. I don't have anyone to share it with, really. I don't know how to connect with people anymore, not like I used to." Jason was quiet for a long moment. He had heard stories of wealthy people feeling isolated or disconnected, but he never truly understood what that felt like until now. I guess I've never had all that," he said slowly. "But sometimes, I think that's a good thing. I've always had to work with what I've got. No fancy stuff, no big house or office, but I've got Ben and I've got this dream, and that keeps me going." Margaret looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the raw honesty in his words. There was no bitterness in his tone, no resentment of the life he had been dealt. Jason had always found a way to make the best of things, and in that, he had something Margaret could never have imagined: peace. A peace that came from knowing what truly mattered. They sat in silence for a while, letting the weight of their words sink in. Margaret felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't trying to impress anyone or put on a face for the world. She was simply being herself, sharing her feelings with someone who didn't judge her or expect anything in return. As the weeks went by, they continued to meet at the cafe. Jason kept working hard, balancing his 2 jobs and spending time with Ben whenever he could. Margaret, meanwhile, offered her advice and guidance on business ideas, sometimes even helping him refine his plans for a small business. It wasn't easy, of course, starting a business from scratch never was, but she believed in Jason. She could see his determination, his hunger to provide for his son, and his desire to build a better future. But it wasn't just business that kept their meetings going. They had become friends in the truest sense of the word. They laughed together, shared personal stories, and supported each other through the ups and downs of their lives. Margaret began to feel a sense of warmth that she hadn't experienced in a long time. The connection between them grew slowly but steadily, until it felt as though they had known each other for much longer than they actually had. One evening, after they had shared a meal at the cafe, Jason hesitated before speaking. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice a little unsure. "I know I don't have much to offer, but I wanted to thank you. You've really helped me, not just with the business stuff, but with everything. You've given me hope, Margaret. I didn't realize how much I needed that." Margaret felt a lump form in her throat. She had always been the one to offer advice, to help others, but hearing Jason's words made her realize just how much he had touched her life as well. "I'm glad I could help," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But you've helped me too. You've reminded me of what's really important in life. You've made me see that there's more to success than just achievements. It's about finding something real, something that makes you feel alive." Jason smiled, and for a moment the weight of the world seemed to lift from his shoulders. In that moment, they both understood that they weren't just helping each other with business or personal struggles. They were helping each other heal in ways they hadn't expected. A few weeks later, Jason took a big step forward. With Margaret's guidance, he applied for a small business loan and began working on his dream of opening a food truck. It wasn't easy. There were many obstacles, many long nights spent working out the details, but Jason felt determined. He knew that with each step, he was moving closer to giving Ben a better life, a life where he didn't have to struggle the way Jason had. Margaret continued to support him, offering her business expertise whenever he needed it. She was proud of how far Jason had come, and she could see how much his dream meant to him. But what struck her most was how different Jason was from the people she usually dealt with. He wasn't chasing success for the sake of power or recognition. He was doing it for something far more meaningful: his son's future. One day, after a long meeting about his food truck, Jason looked at Margaret and asked, "Do you think it's really possible? Do you think I can make this work?" Margaret smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I know you can. You've already shown so much strength. And you've got something most people don't have: heart. That's what will make the difference." Jason felt a swell of gratitude. "I couldn't have done this without you." Margaret shrugged lightly. "You could have, Jason. I just gave you a little push. The rest is all you." They both knew that their bond was growing stronger, and that this unexpected friendship had turned into something far deeper than either of them had anticipated. There was a sense of unspoken understanding between them, a connection that went beyond words, beyond business. It was a bond built on trust, respect, and the realization that life had brought them together for a reason. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. As Jason's food truck business began to take shape, he knew that it wasn't just a dream anymore. It was becoming a reality. And he owed a large part of that to Margaret, the woman who had seen something in him when no one else had. But what neither of them expected was how much their growing connection would continue to change their lives in ways neither of them could have imagined. The journey toward Jason's dream of owning a food truck had begun in earnest. He had spent months working tirelessly, preparing his business plan, applying for loans, and seeking advice from people he trusted. Margaret had been his steady guide, throughout this process, offering invaluable advice from her vast experience in business. At first, Jason had been overwhelmed by the prospect of starting something from scratch, but with Margaret's support, he began to feel a renewed sense of confidence. Though he worked hard every day, the reality of running a business was daunting. There were many obstacles along the way: complicated paperwork, the search for a suitable location to park his food truck, and the struggle to balance work and family life. It seemed like there was always something new to handle. Despite the setbacks, Jason never lost sight of his goal. He was determined to create a better life for his son, Ben. It wasn't just about the business. It was about proving to himself that he could overcome the challenges life had thrown his way. Margaret continued to meet with Jason regularly. Their conversations often focused on business matters, finances, marketing, and the logistics of starting a food truck business. But as time passed, their friendship deepened in ways neither of them had expected. Their bond went beyond just professional advice. It became a genuine connection, one that brought them both comfort and understanding. One evening, as they sat in the quiet corner of the cafe, Jason leaned back in his chair, staring out the window. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the city streets, and for a moment he allowed himself to relax. It had been a long day of planning and organizing, and he was starting to feel the weight of it all. "You know, Margaret," Jason said quietly, his voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had been working nonstop for months, "sometimes I wonder if I'm doing the right thing. I've come so far, but it still feels like it's not enough. I'm not sure I can keep up with all the demands." Margaret listened carefully, her eyes softening with empathy. "It's okay to feel that way, Jason. You've come a long way, and starting a business is never easy. But the fact that you've made it this far shows how much you care. You're doing this for Ben, for your future. That's a powerful motivation." Jason shook his head, frustration creeping into his voice. "I just keep thinking about how much I've already sacrificed, how many hours I've worked, and how hard it's been to keep everything together. I don't know if I can keep pushing forward like this." Margaret smiled softly, reaching across the table to place her hand on his. "I understand how hard it must feel. But you're not alone in this, Jason. You've got me, and I believe in you. You've got a heart for this. That's what makes all the difference." Jason looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Margaret. I don't know what I would have done without you. You've helped me more than you can imagine. Not just with the business stuff, but with everything." Margaret nodded, her smile warm. "You've done the hard work. I'm just here to help guide you. You've got the drive and determination to succeed, Jason. I know you're going to make it." But as Jason spoke, Margaret could see the exhaustion in his eyes. He had been working non-stop for months, juggling his 2 jobs with his dreams of building a business. His energy was fading, and she could see the toll it was taking on him. She could feel the weight of his struggles, and for the first time, she wondered if there was more she could do to help. There was a moment of silence, a quiet pause as Margaret considered something that had been on her mind for a while. She had always been a woman of action, always ready to solve problems, to lend a helping hand. But now, the idea that had been slowly forming in her mind seemed like a natural next step. She had the resources, the experience, and the knowledge to help Jason take his business to the next level. After a moment, she spoke softly. "Jason, I've been thinking. You've worked so hard and I see how much this means to you. I think it's time to take things to the next level. I want to help you in a bigger way. I want to offer you a business loan." Jason's eyes widened in surprise. "A loan? But I couldn't possibly accept something like that. I mean, you've already done so much for me. I don't want to take more from you." Margaret smiled kindly, understanding his hesitation. "I know it's a big step, but you've earned it, Jason. You've worked tirelessly for this, and I believe in you. This loan could help you expand your business, get that food truck on the road, and take the pressure off you. You've got the passion, and now you just need the resources to make it happen." Jason sat there stunned. He had never imagined that someone like Margaret would offer him such a significant amount of support. He had always been proud of his Independence, never wanting to rely on anyone, especially not someone with her wealth and success. The idea of accepting such a generous offer was almost overwhelming. "Margaret, I don't know what to say. This is a lot," Jason said, his voice filled with disbelief. "I don't want to owe you anything." Margaret reached across the table and gently touched his hand, her tone calm and reassuring. "You won't owe me anything, Jason. This isn't about charity. This is about investing in someone who deserves a chance. I see how much you've put into this and I want to help you get to the next level. I know you'll pay it forward in your own way one day." Jason's mind was racing. He had always prided himself on doing things on his own, never accepting help from others. But the thought of being able to take his dream to the next level, of finally having the resources to make his food truck a reality, was too tempting to ignore. And as he looked into Margaret's eyes, he realized that this wasn't just a loan. It was an opportunity to make a real change in his life. "I don't know if I can ever repay you for this," Jason said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I promise I'll work harder than ever to make it work. This is more than I ever thought I'd have a chance at." Margaret smiled, her eyes filled with a mixture of pride and compassion. "You don't need to repay me, Jason. Just make it happen. I believe in you, and I'm here to support you every step of the way." As Jason left the cafe that evening, he felt a mix of excitement and fear. The weight of the loan still hung heavily on him, but there was a spark of hope inside him that he hadn't felt in a long time. This was the break he had been waiting for, the chance to turn his dream into reality. But it wasn't just the business loan that he was thinking about. It was the trust that Margaret had shown him, the belief that she had in him when he was uncertain of his own abilities. The next few weeks were a blur of activity as Jason worked to secure his food truck and prepare for the opening. The loan from Margaret allowed him to finally move forward, purchasing the necessary equipment, paying for permits, and finding the right location. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments when he doubted himself, but with every step he felt more confident. He was building something, not just for himself, but for his son, Ben. He could already picture Ben's face lighting up with pride when he saw his father's food truck in action. Margaret continued to be a source of support, offering advice and encouragement whenever Jason needed it. Her belief in him gave him the strength to push through the challenges, and soon enough, his dream was taking shape. For Jason, it wasn't just about the food truck anymore. It was about proving to himself that he was capable of more than just surviving. He was building a future that he could be proud of, and he knew that he wouldn't be alone in this journey. Margaret had shown him that even in the darkest of times there was hope, and sometimes all it took was one person believing in you to make all the difference. The grand opening of Jason's food truck was finally here. It had taken months of planning, hard work, and sacrifice, but everything was ready. Jason felt a mix of excitement and nervousness as he stood in front of his shiny new food truck. The sign above it read, "Carter's Cravings," a name he had chosen with his son Ben, who was beyond excited for the big day. Margaret had been there for every step of the journey, offering guidance when Jason needed it, and simply being there to cheer him on when things felt overwhelming. She had seen Jason struggle, but she had also seen him rise above it all. The business had grown beyond just a dream. It was now a reality, and it had the potential to change Jason's life in ways he had never imagined. The opening day was a perfect, crisp Saturday morning, and the line of people waiting to try Jason's food was long. Word had spread about the delicious dishes Jason had been perfecting for months. The combination of fresh ingredients, hearty flavors, and Jason's personal touch made his food stand out. As he greeted customers with a smile, he couldn't help but feel a wave of pride. This was his moment. Ben stood by his side, grinning from ear to ear, proud to see his father finally achieving what he had always dreamed of. Margaret was also there, standing in the background, watching with a sense of satisfaction as Jason interacted with his customers. There was no question that Jason had worked hard to get to this point, but seeing the joy on his face, seeing him thrive in his own business, made Margaret feel that everything had been worth it. As the hours passed, the crowd continued to grow, The food truck was a hit. People were raving about the flavors, and Jason's food became the talk of the neighborhood. His hard work had paid off, and the success he was experiencing felt like a validation of everything he had worked for. Margaret approached Jason during a break in the action, a warm smile on her face. "It's incredible to see this, Jason. You've done something amazing here." Jason wiped his brow, still catching his breath from all the work. He smiled back at her, gratitude in his eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you, Margaret. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." Margaret laughed softly, her eyes twinkling with warmth. "You had it in you all along. I just helped you realize it." Jason looked at her with genuine appreciation. "I'll never be able to thank you enough for everything you've done. This moment, all of this, it wouldn't be possible without your help." Margaret shook her head. "You don't need to thank me. Seeing you succeed is all the thanks I need." As the day wore on, Jason's food truck became busier, and the line of customers didn't seem to end. Jason was constantly moving, cooking, serving, and keeping everything running smoothly. It was exactly what he had hoped for. His dream was unfolding right before his eyes. But even as his food truck flourished, there was something else that kept his heart full. His relationship with Margaret had evolved into something much deeper than either of them had expected. What had started as a simple act of kindness, offering a man in need some leftovers, had turned into something far more meaningful. Margaret and Jason had formed a bond that wasn't based on pity or obligation. It was based on respect, shared experiences, and an understanding of the struggles they both faced in different ways. They had become true friends, and somewhere along the way, that friendship had begun to feel like something more. As Jason looked over at Margaret, he realized just how much she had come to mean to him. She had been his guide, his mentor, and his friend. But lately he had begun to think that their connection might be something deeper. He wasn't sure if she felt the same, but he couldn't ignore the growing warmth he felt whenever they were together. After the initial rush of customers began to die down, Jason decided to take a break. He called Ben over to sit with him and take a quick rest before the evening crowd came. Margaret joined them, sitting down on the bench beside Jason. "You know," Margaret said, glancing at the sunset, "this is the beginning of something amazing for you. It's so clear to see that you were meant to do this." Jason smiled, his heart full of gratitude. "It's still hard to believe, honestly. There were so many times I thought I wasn't going to make it. But here I am." Margaret nodded thoughtfully, her eyes meeting his. "You never gave up. That's the most important thing, and now look at where you are." Jason looked at her with a soft smile, feeling the weight of her words. It wasn't just about the business. It was about the journey, the struggle, and the people who had been there along the way. He realized that without Margaret, he might never have found the courage to take the first step. Her belief in him had given him the strength to push forward, even when things seemed impossible. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden light over the food truck, Jason found himself speaking from the heart. "You've done so much for me, Margaret. I don't think I can ever truly repay you for all the help you've given me, but I want you to know that I'll always be grateful." Margaret smiled warmly, her eyes reflecting the sincerity of his words. "I don't need anything from you, Jason. I'm just happy to see you succeed. You've worked hard for this, and you deserve every bit of it." But Jason wasn't finished. There was something he needed to say, something he had been holding back for a while. Taking a deep breath, he turned to Margaret, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've been thinking a lot about how much you've meant to me these past few months," Jason began. "You've been more than just a friend or a mentor to me. You've made me see that there's more to life than just surviving. You've helped me believe in myself, in my dreams, and in the future. And somewhere along the way, I realized that it's not just about the business anymore. It's about you too." Margaret looked at him, her heart racing as she sensed where this conversation was headed. Before she could say anything, Jason continued. "I don't expect anything, but I need to be honest with you. I've grown to care for you. Not just because you helped me with my business, but because of who you are. Your kindness, your strength, and your belief in me when I didn't believe in myself. You've changed my life in more ways than I can count." Margaret's breath caught in her throat as she looked into Jason's eyes. She had always respected him, admired him for his resilience and his love for his son. But over time she had come to feel something more, something she hadn't fully acknowledged until now. "I care for you too, Jason," she said softly. "You've brought something into my life that I didn't even know I was missing. You've made me feel things I hadn't felt in a long time." For a moment there was silence between them, comfortable, full of understanding. Jason reached out, gently taking Margaret's hand in his. There was no need for words. Their connection spoke volumes. As the evening settled in and the last customers left, Jason and Margaret stayed together, talking about everything and nothing. The food truck was a symbol of Jason's success, but it was also a symbol of something greater, of a dream realized, of perseverance rewarded, and of two people who had come into each other's lives in the most unexpected way. Jason's business continued to grow, and with it so did his relationship with Margaret. They both knew that their journey had only just begun. There was still much to be done, but for the first time in a long while, Jason felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. And as the months passed, their bond strengthened into something neither of them had anticipated, but both had come to cherish. What began with a simple request for leftovers had blossomed into something far deeper, something neither of them would have ever thought possible. A partnership, a friendship, and perhaps even something more. And through it all, Jason knew one thing for certain: the journey ahead was going to be full of possibilities, and he wasn't facing it alone.